Chardonnay is a green-skinned grape variety used to make white wine. It originated in the Burgundy wine region of eastern France, but is now grown wherever wine is produced, from England to New Zealand. For new and developing wine regions, growing Chardonnay is seen as a rite of passage and an easy entry into the international wine market. The Chardonnay grape itself is very neutral, with many of the flavors commonly associated with the grape being derived from such influences as terroir and oak. It is vinified in many different styles, from the lean, crisply mineral wines of Chablis, France, to New World wines with oak and tropical fruit flavors. In cool climates, Chardonnay tends to be medium to light body with noticeable acidity and flavors of green plum, apple and pear. In warmer locations, the flavors become more citrus, peach, and melon, while in very warm locations, more fig and tropical fruit notes such as banana and mango come out. Wines that have gone through malolactic fermentation tend to have softer acidity and fruit flavors with buttery mouthfeel and hazelnut notes. Chardonnay is an important component of many sparkling wines around the world, including champagne. A peak in popularity in the late 1980s gave way to a backlash among those wine connoisseurs who saw the grape as a leading negative component of the globalization of wine. Nonetheless, it remains one of the most widely planted grape varieties, with over 160,000 hectares worldwide, second only to Iran among white wine grapes, and planted in more wine regions than any other grape, including Cabernet Sauvignon. History. For much of its history, a connection was assumed between Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, Pinot Blanc. In addition to being found in the same region of France for centuries, ampelographers noted that the leaves of each plant have near identical shape and structure. Pierre Gallet disagreed with this assessment, believing that Chardonnay was not related to any other major grape variety. Viticulturalists Maynard de Meuron and Harold Olmo proposed a descendancy from a wild Vitis vinifera vine that was a step removed from white Muscat. Chardonnay's true origins were further obscured by vineyard owners in Lebanon and Syria, who claimed that the grape's ancestry could be traced to the Middle East, from where it was introduced to Europe by returning crusaders, though little external evidence supports that theory. Another theory stated that it originated from an ancient indigenous vine found in Cyprus. Modern DNA fingerprinting research at University of California, Davis, now suggests that Chardonnay is the result of a cross between the Pinot Noir and Gouais Blanc grape varieties. The Romans are thought to have brought Gouais Blanc from Croatia, and it was widely cultivated by peasants in eastern France. The Pinot of the French aristocracy grew in close proximity to the Gouais Blanc, giving both grapes ample opportunity to interbreed. Since the two parents were genetically distant, many of the crosses showed hybrid vigor and were selected for further propagation. These successful crosses included Chardonnay and siblings such as Allégret, Auban Vert, Auxerrois, Bachet Noir, Beau Noir, Franc Noir de la Haute-Savoie, Gamay Blanc, Laureate, Gamay Noir, Melon, Nippollet, Perrier, Roublot, Sacy, and Dameron. Clones, crossing, and mutations. As of 2006, 34 clonal varieties of Chardonnay could be found in vineyards throughout France, most of which were developed at the University of Burgundy in Dijon. The so-called Dijon clones are bred for their adaptive attributes, with vineyard owners planting the clonal variety best suited to the terroir and which will produce the characteristics that they are seeking in the wine. Examples include the lower-yielding clones Dijon 76, 95, and 96 that produce more flavor-concentrated clusters. Dijon 77 and 809 produce more aromatic wines with a grapey perfume, while Dijon 75, 78, 121, 124, 125, and 277 are more vigorous and high-yielding clones. New World varieties include the Mendoza clone, which produced some of the early California Chardonnays. The Mendoza clone is prone to develop millerandage, also known as hens and chicks, where the berries develop unevenly. In places such as Oregon, the use of newer Dijon clones has had some success in those regions of the Willamette Valley with climates similar to that of Burgundy. Chardonnay has served as parent to several French-American hybrid grapes, as well as crossings with other vivinifera varieties. Examples include the hybrid Chardonnay, which was a Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc cross produced in 1953 at the New York State Agricultural Experiment Station. Mutations of the Chardonnay grape include the rare pink-berried Chardonnay rose, also Chardonnay Blanc Musqué, which produces an intensely aromatic wine. Chardonnay Blanc Musqué is mostly found around the Mykonos village of Clessay and sometimes confused with the Dijon 166 clone planted in South Africa, which yields muscat-like aromas. In the 1930s, Chardonnay was crossed with the Cybele grape to create the hybrid grape Rivat Blanc. Viticulture. Chardonnay has a wide-ranging reputation for relative ease of cultivation and ability to adapt to different conditions. The grape is very malleable in that it reflects and takes on the impression of its terroir and winemaker. It is a highly vigorous vine, with extensive leaf cover which can inhibit the energy and nutrient uptake of its grape clusters. Vineyard managers counteract this with aggressive pruning and canopy management. When Chardonnay vines are planted densely, they are forced to compete for resources and funnel energy into the grape clusters. In certain conditions, the vines can be very high-yielding, but the wine produced from such vines suffers a drop in quality if yields go much beyond 4.5 tons per acre. Producers of premium Chardonnay limit yields to less than half this amount. Sparkling wine producers tend not to focus as much on limiting yields, since concentrated flavors are not as important as the wine's finesse. Harvesting time is crucial to winemaking, with the grape rapidly losing acidity as soon as it ripens. Some viticultural hazards include the risk of damage from springtime frost, as Chardonnay is an early budding vine, usually a week after Pinot Noir. To combat the threat of frost, a method developed in Burgundy involves aggressive pruning just prior to budburst. This shocks the vine and delays budburst up to 2 weeks, which is often long enough for warmer weather to arrive. Millerandage and coulure can also pose problems, along with powdery mildew attacking the thin skin of the grapes. Because of Chardonnay's early ripening, it can thrive in wine regions with short growing seasons, and in regions such as Burgundy, can be harvested before autumn rain sets in and brings the threat of rot. While Chardonnay can adapt to almost all vineyard soils, the three it seems to like most are chalk, clay, and limestone, all very prevalent throughout Chardonnay's traditional homeland. The Grand Cross of Chablis are planted on hillsides composed of Kimmeridgian marl, limestone, and chalk. The outlying regions, falling under the more basic Petit Chablis appellation, are planted on Portlandian limestone, which produces wines with less finesse. Chalk beds are found throughout the Champagne region, and the Côte d'Or has many areas composed of limestone and clay. In Burgundy, the amount of limestone to which the Chardonnay vines are exposed also seems to have some effect on the resulting wine. In the Meursault region, the premier CRU vineyards planted at Meursault-Charmes have topsoil almost 78 in above limestone, and the resulting wines are very rich and rounded. In the nearby Les Perriers vineyard, the topsoil is only around 12 in above the limestone, and the wine from that region is much more powerful, minerally, and tight, needing longer in the bottle to develop fully. In other areas, soil type can compensate for lack of ideal climate conditions. In South Africa, for example, regions with stonier, shaly soils and high clay levels tend to produce lower yielding and more Burgundian-style wine, despite having a discernibly warmer climate than France. In contrast, South African Chardonnay produced from more sandstone-based vineyards tend to be richer and more weighty. Confusion with Pinot Blanc due to some ampelographical similarities. Pinot Blanc and Chardonnay were often mistaken for each other and even today share many of the same synonyms. The grapevines, leaves, and clusters look identical at first glance, but some subtle differences are seen. The most visible of these can be observed as the grapes are ripening, with Chardonnay grapes taking on a more golden green color than Pinot Blanc grapes. On closer inspection, the grapevine shows slight differences in the texture and length of the hairs on the vine shoot, and the veins of a Chardonnay leaf are naked near the petiolar sinus. The open area where the leaf connects to the stem is delineated by veins at the edge. Cabernet Sauvignon is one of the few other Vitis vinifera grapevines to share this characteristic. This confusion between Pinot Blanc and Chardonnay was very pervasive throughout northern Italy, where the two vines grew interspersed in the vineyard and were blended in winemaking. The Italian government did not dispatch researchers to try to distinguish the two vines until 1978. A similar situation occurred in France, with the two vines being commonly confused until the mid-19th century, when ampelographers began combing through the vineyards of Chablis and Burgundy, identifying the true Chardonnay and weeding out the Pinot Blanc. France. In France, Chardonnay is the second most widely planted white grape variety, just behind Eugène Blanc and ahead of Sémillon and Sauvignon Blanc. The grape first rose to prominence in the Chablis and Burgundy regions. In Champagne, it is most often blended with Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, but is also used to produce single varietal Blanc de Blanchisserie styles of sparkling wine. Chardonnay can be found in appellation d'origine contrôlée wines of the Loire Valley and Jura wine region, as well as the Vin de Pays wines of the Languedoc. Burgundy Chardonnay is one of the dominant grapes in Burgundy, though Pinot Noir vines outnumber it by nearly a 3-to-1 ratio. In addition to Chablis, Chardonnay is found in the Côte d'Or, as well as the Côte Chalonnaise and Mâconnais. It is grown in 8 Grand CRU vineyards: the Montrachet, Montrachet, Créats Batard, Montrachet, Batard, Montrachet, Chevalier, Montrachet, and Bienvenues Batard, Montrachet, as well as Charlemagne, Corton Charlemagne, and La Musigny. In addition to being the most expensive, the Burgundy examples of Chardonnay were long considered the benchmark standard of expressing terroir through Chardonnay. The Montrachets are noted for the high alcohol levels, often above 13%, as well as deep concentration of flavors. The vineyards around Chassagne-Montrachet tend to have a characteristic hazelnut aroma to them, while those of Puligny-Montrachet have more steely flavors. Both Grand CRU and Premier CRU examples from Corton Charlemagne have been known to demonstrate marzipan, while Meursault wines tend to be the most round and buttery examples. South of the Côte d'Or are the Côte Chalonnaise and Mâconnais wine regions. The villages of Mercury, Montigny-les-Buxy, and Raleigh are the largest producers of Chardonnay in the Côte Chalonnaise, with the best-made examples rivaling those of the Côte de Beaune. In the Mykonos, white wine production is centered on the town of Macon and the Pouilly-Fuissé region. The full-bodied wines of the Pouilly-Fuissé have long held cult wine status with prices that can rival the Grand Cru white Burgundies. Further south, in the region of Beaujolais, Chardonnay has started to replace Allégate as the main white wine grape and is even replacing Gamay in some areas around Saint-Véran. With the exception of Pouilly-Fuissé, the wines of the Mykonos are the closest Burgundy example to New World Chardonnay, though it is not identical. Typically, Macon Blanc, Basic Bourgogne, Beaujolais Blanc, and Saint-Véran are meant to be consumed within 2 to 3 years of release. However, many of the well-made examples of white Burgundy from the Côte d'Or need at least 3 years in the bottle to develop enough to express the aromas and character of the wine. Hazelnut, licorice, and spice are some of the flavors that can develop as these wines age. Chablis Chardonnay is the only permitted AOC grape variety in the Chablis region, with the wines that are developing such worldwide recognition that the name Chablis has taken on somewhat generic connotations to mean any dry white wine, even those not made from Chardonnay. The name is protected in the European Union and for wines sold in the EU. Chablis refers only to the Chardonnay wine produced in this region of the Yonne département. The region sits on the outer edges of the Paris Basin. On the other side of the basin is the village of Kimmeridge in England, which gives its name to the Kimmeridgian soil that is located throughout Chablis. The French describe this soil as argilo-calcaire and is a composition of clay, limestone, and fossilized oyster shells. The most expensive examples of Chardonnay from Chablis come from the 7 Grand Cru vineyards that account for around 247 acres on the southwest side of one slope along the Ciron River near the towns of Chablis, Blanchottes, Bougros, Les Clos, Grenouille-Priesses, Valmore, and Vaudézier. The wines from these crosses most often capture the garde de pierre refusal or gunflint quality that is characteristic of Chablis wine. Chardonnay was believed to be first planted in Chablis by the Cistercians at Pontigny Abbey in the 12th century. Today, the Chardonnay made in the Chablis region is one of the purest expression of the varietal character of the grape due to the simplistic style of winemaking favored in this region. Chablis winemakers want to emphasize the terroir of the calcareous soil and cooler climate that help maintain high acidity. The wines rarely go through malolactic fermentation or are exposed to oak. The biting, green apple-like acidity is a trademark of Chablis and can be noticeable in the bouquet. The acidity can mellow with age, and Chablis are some of the longest-living examples of Chardonnay. Some examples of Chablis can have an earthy, whetstone flavor that can get mysterious as it ages before mellowing into delicate honeyed notes. The use of oak is controversial in the Chablis community, with some winemakers dismissing it as counter to the Chablis style or terroir, while others embrace its use, though not to the length that would characterize a New World Chardonnay. The winemakers who use oak tend to favor more neutral oak that does not impart the vanilla characteristic associated with American oak. The amount of char in the barrel is often very light, which limits the amount of toastiness perceived in the wine. The advocates of oak in Chablis point to the positive benefits of allowing limited oxygenation with the wine through the permeable oak barrels. This can have the effect of softening the wine and making the generally austere and acidic Chablis more approachable at a younger age. Champagne. In the Champagne, Chardonnay is one of 3 major grape varieties planted in the region. It is most commonly found in the Auvergne-Marne departments, which, combined with Chablis, accounted for more than half of all plantings of Chardonnay in France during the 20th century. In the Côte-des-Blancs district of the Marne, Chardonnay thrives on the chalk soil. The three main villages around the Côte grow Chardonnay that emphasizes certain characteristics that the Champagne producers seek depending on their house style. The village of Avize grows grapes that produce the lightest wines. Cremant makes the most aromatic. Mesnil produces wines with the most acidity. The Côte-des-Blancs is the only district in the Champagne region predominantly planted with Chardonnay. In the four other main districts, Aube, Côte de Sézanne, Montagne de Reims, and Vallée de la Marne, Chardonnay lags behind Pinot Noir in planting. In the outlying region of Ain, only Pinot Meunier has a significant presence. Despite being less planted, the Blanc-de-Blanc style of Champagne is far more commonly produced than Blanc-de-Nez is. This is partly because Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier produce very coarse and heavy wines that lack the finesse and balance that Chardonnay brings to the mix. Non-sparkling still wine Chardonnay is produced under the Coteau Champenois AOC. The wine is much more acidic than that of Chablis and is normally made bone dry. Despite receiving the same amount of sunshine as the Chablis region, Chardonnay grapes in Champagne rarely attain full ripeness due to the mean temperature of the region being around 10 degrees Celsius, barely above the minimum average temperature needed to ripen grapes. Therefore, the Chardonnay grapes do not fully develop the fruit flavors, and the still version of Champagne can taste very un-Chardonnay-like because of this. However, it does lessen the premium on needing to keep yields low that other wine regions battle, since not much flavor is going to develop in the grapes anyway. Rather, the element in Chardonnay that Champagne winemakers look for is the finesse and balance of acidity that it brings to the blend. Some flavors that can emerge from, particularly with extended time on its lees, include creamy and nuttiness with some floral notes. Other French regions, Champagne, Chablis, and Burgundy, account for more than 3/5 of all Chardonnay plantings in France. The next largest concentration is found in the Languedoc, where it was first planted around the town of Limoux, and up to 30% can be blended with Maussac in the sparkling Blanquette de Limoux. Every year since 1991, Chardonnay production is celebrated in Limoux during the Toques-et-Cloches festival. By 2000, more than 9,000 hectares were planted, with many being used for wines under the Vin de Pays DOC. These wines were unique in that they were some of the first examples of Chardonnay to be varietally labeled as Chardonnay. Other French wine regions with Chardonnay plantings include Alsace, Ardèche, Jura, Savoie, and the Loire Valley. In Jura, it is used to create vin de Pays dessert wines. Here, the grape is known as Melon d'Arbois Gamay Blanc and is sometimes blended with Savagnin. It is most widely found in Arbois, Côtes du Jura, and L'Étoile-les-Auxes. In the Loire, up to 20% of Chardonnay can be included in the Chenin Blanc-based wines of Anjou. Blanc and more producers are using the grape to soften some of the edges of Chenin Blanc. It can also be used in the sparkling wines of Saumur, and some Muscadet producers have begun experimenting with oak-aged Chardonnay.